Hey everyone, if you've been here before, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, thank you for visiting. Today I'm sharing a delightful new tarot deck. It is called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow Tarot. This deck is the result of the creativity of Nicholas Lawyer. He is both the artist and the creator. There is no other author or contributor named, just Nick Lawyer. So I think all credit goes to this artist. The deck is pretty new. It was released by Schiffer Publishing in 2023 at the time of this video recording, just a couple weeks ago, I believe. So maybe October 2023. Under the Red Feather Mind, Body, and Spirit trademark, if you're familiar with that. It doesn't always, overtly say Schiffer Publishing, but it is owned by Schiffer. The box is nice. It's one of the vertical, stand upright, right, and the lid just slips on. It's got this little inner support, very sturdy, pretty image on the front. The gold accents are gorgeous. I mean, come on. This does, come off really easily, which I like because I don't like to fight with my lids. But, it could slip off a little unexpectedly. So just be aware. And I imagine maybe it's different depending on what you get. I'm not sure that's always the case with every single box, right? These are mass-produced boxes, but that's how mine is anyway. The guidebook is nice, right? It's like a little medium size, not like a big book that needs its own space on the bookshelf. It fits down in to the box, but the printing, thank you very much, is large enough font that I can see it. I'm not squinting and feeling like an old lady when I read it. It's full color, which is fabulous, of course. It's a really nice, clean, easy to read layout, so that's fabulous. You get each major arcana card is largely depicted in color, and you get a decent write-up. And then when you get to the minors, you get like an overview picture for each suit, and then the descriptions, and they're smaller, but where there's something individual about them that it strays at all, from typical imagery, that's often mentioned or described just so you know what you're looking at, right? So this one says, the Nine of Wands is Ichabod racing to the church bridge, right? So when you get toward the end, you encounter the spreads. I'll find them. There we go. And the book included generously 4 spreads, I thought. Often there's 1 token spread. Maybe they'll max out at 3. So we have the love triangle, perfect for the storyline, and we'll get into that in a moment. We have Ichabod's Guide. Did we have? Yeah, Ichabod's Guide was cool. The Horseman's Chase, that just sounds exciting, right? Like, I want to use that just for the name, I think. And Tribal Chieftain, which refers to some of the lore about a specific Native American and the history of the land and things like that, which is, of course, appropriate for the setting of the story. This little conclusion. And then, holy moly, will you look at that? We even, gave some credit with a bibliography for our sources that inspired any of our commentary or even, the content, the interpretation of the images. And I thought that was well done also. So that's the guidebook, really. Short and sweet, but useful. I had no problem finding my way around it, and you can look things up quickly if you need to. When we look at the cards, they are larger than what's considered the typical tarot card size. I like larger cards because I love the art. I want to see it. I don't want to squint at it. I want it to be easy to enjoy. I want to be able to read the numbers easily, any keywords or titles that are on it, especially when you get, lots of them are dark, and that's fine. When it's this size, it's okay. I can see well enough. I know what I'm looking at, right? You'd be surprised how many times you're in a reading situation, whether you do it as a hobbyist or, semi-pro or pro, When you have less than optimal lighting, let's just put it that way. Can we talk about the backs for a second? Wow, so pretty. All this gold foil, and it's very fairy tale-esque with the pumpkins and the moon and the gold, and it's very flowery and ornate. But then you got that spooky vibe with your little skulls, right, coming out of the pumpkins on the top and bottom. It's really nice. No gold foil on the side. I mean, that would have been all kinds of extra and cool, right? That would have been nice. I would like to see more publishers get into coloring the sides too, even if it's not shiny. It doesn't have to be foil, but it would just be cool if this was dark, maybe dark blue to match this kind of indigo back color that we have going. But that's just me being greedy now, I guess. It's me being picky. So I love the cards. It is that kind of, it's a little stiff. And because of their size, someone with little hands like mine, people that have, I don't know, repetitive motion injuries, arthritis, things like that. There's more of us out there than probably publishers realize or anyone realizes. So just doing the traditional riffle shuffling isn't always a good option for lots of reasons. I think it's hard on your cards too, man. So I'm happy with the stock and the size of it for sure. When we look at the style of it, right, you can see that it's definitely modeled closely after the Rider-Waite-Smith traditional imagery, but the artist is consistent in staying true to the setting and the contents of Washington Irving's story. And so you don't lose your sense of immersion in the tale. We don't step out of that ever, and I really appreciated that. It's got that same kind of clean, flat, artistic style, which is nice and easy to read, and it's also reminiscent of Rider-Waite-Smith, so it honors that. The color scheme is very similar in that it's somewhat of a restricted palette, but it's just not quite as, I don't know how to say this nicely. The original Rider-Waite-Smith is a little garish to me. It's a little harsh. Some of the combos of the colors are not that easy on the eyes, and while this stays true to the essence of those colors, it goes for slightly different hues. It has a broader range. It's just not the ugly yellow. I'm so sorry if you love that yellow, but I think it's the ugly yellow. And here we have just slightly different hues, and we do have a broader range. So it's just nice to read. I really appreciate it. Like honoring the tradition, but doing your own thing in an aesthetically pleasing way. Quite nice, really. It was thoughtfully rendered. It really was. I can tell that thought went into every single card, and that's appreciated. It shows. So about Washington Irving, I think you need a little background because we can't really escape his presence and influence on the story and the cards. So we're just going to have to do it. And maybe you already know this information, but in case you don't, Washington Irving was a 19th century American writer. He's known as the father of the American short story. So he moved to Tarrytown, New York when he was 15 years old. Tarrytown's a little village 25 miles north of New York City, and it's situated like right near the Hudson River. So Irving was fleeing New York City during, ironically, a breakout of yellow fever. So relatable, right? He's leaving, the crowded germs of a pandemic city and heading out to the country to be around fewer people and to escape the outbreak. And I don't really know what his concept would have been about germs at the time, but I know that he knew enough, and a lot of other people did too, to be like, oh, pandemic hits here, I'm going elsewhere for whatever reason. And it was a good instinct for sure. So he lived there for some time, and he started to gain skills and reputation as a writer. He was submitting his workplaces. It was well received. But in America in the late 1700s, because that's when it was, he does his writing that he's famous for now, technically in the 1800s. But at the tail end of the 1700s, when he was getting started, there wasn't work to make a career of writing in America. We just weren't that kind of place yet. And really, man, it's hard now for writers, isn't it? So he went abroad to live and work in England for some years. I think he had family there. I think his sister was there, and I don't know who else. It was while he was in England, so around 1820, that he writes The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was based largely upon his time in Tarrytown. So he just renames it Sleepy Hollow, but it's clearly the inspiration. Eventually, Irving returned to Tarrytown, where he built a home, and then he lived out the rest of his days there. Tarrytown was the inspiration for the setting and also many of the details, the characters, the places, the lore of Sleepy Hollow. The village changed its name. The real world village, Sleepy Hollow, changed its name in the 1990s in order to capitalize on the fame of its resident author, whose home is still there. He's buried in the town cemetery, and visitors can go and visit both his home and his plot, his headstone, and all that to this day. And it is a tourist site. It looks like it was a good move for them to change their name to Sleepy Hollow. When I was doing just a little bit of research and refreshing my memory on the story, the tale, lots of things came up. And of course, a lot of references to that 1990s film by Tim Burton, which is a reimagining of Sleepy Hollow. It was, still kind of period specific, but they changed. He wasn't a school teacher anymore, and he sure wasn't homely anymore. The main character, Ichabod, is Johnny Depp, in his prime. So I think he was kind of like a detective, but they didn't call them detectives then. So it's been a while since I've seen it. But that movie was in production for years, right? And it was really just a creative collaboration and a work of love between Johnny Depp and Tim Burton. And so I wonder, since even though it wasn't, I don't think, released in theaters until 1999, I wonder if because it was in production so long, word was out, and so the town, Tarrytown, knew it was coming, knew with a big name actor and a big name director that this film was going to be released. They knew it was going to give a lot of attention to their town, and so they made that smart move to just change their name to Sleepy Hollow. I don't know. I didn't read that anywhere. It's just my idea. But if so, it was a good move because it worked. So there were many, many local legends about spooky things, hauntings and apparitions that were there to inspire Irving's tale, which is, in my opinion, the quintessential American ghost story. Irving's tale is based heavily upon already existing local folklore. So he probably didn't invent the concept of a headless horseman or some of the other specters and details and spooky stories that he alludes to or describes in the story, but he made them his own. He brought them to life. He set them, into the storyline and the plot. He gave them his own details, his own spin. But I really believe it's a bit of an homage to the place. Obviously, the place got into his heart, and even when he was, so many miles away across the sea, he didn't forget it, and it really ends up being his biggest claim to fame, or certainly one of them. If I think about just the story itself, I feel like in order for you to appreciate the cards, we might need just a really short refresher, a basic plot overview. And it's a short story, so it's not like I'm going to be reading you a novel or anything. I think the original story was 23 pages, right? I told you he was the father of the short story. So it is a short story. There aren't a lot of characters, but you'll want to know what's going on to better appreciate the cards if we're going to walk through them. So spoiler alert, if you have not read this story and you intend to do so, you may want to stop this video right here, because I'm about to give this little summary just so we have proper context to appreciate the cards. Now, most people are probably already familiar with this tale, but if you're a bit rusty on the details, like I was, here is a quick overview, right? So let's just use a few cards to illustrate it. Start looking at these bad boys, right? So we'll start right here, okay? Meet Ichabod Crane. He's an awkward, gangly, cowardly, I would say, school teacher who moves from the city in Connecticut to the country village of Sleepy Hollow, New York. It was it was over 200 years ago. The setting takes place, I think, the end of the 1700s, and it's written in the early 1800s, written around 1820. So such towns back in this time period had just one schoolmaster and one schoolhouse where all ages of students would attend. So they had to be taught by a single teacher and all the different grades and all their different levels. And that would be a pretty big job. So typically one or more families in the village agreed to feed and house the schoolmaster. The towns always came up with their own way of offering compensation as best they could afford in order to bring, an educated person who could devote themselves to teaching the children. So as part of the position's compensation, it would be maybe meals, like people take turns having him over for dinner. Maybe he stays in one person's house or several people's houses, or he gets discounted rent, something like that. So Ichabod gets to know the families and all the local ghost stories too, while he's a guest in the townspeople's homes, right? While they're feeding him and hosting him and all of that. And the most frightening tale of all is the legend of the Headless Horseman. It terrifies Ichabod more than any of the other stories, and he's a big chicken. So the Headless Horseman was a terrifying specter of what was said to be a fallen Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War period, and he haunted the roads at night still looking for it. He was grumpy, to say the least, fearsome, and he was known to pursue people, which was terrifying. Crossing the bridge out of town was the only escape from the horseman's chase, as it was believed he could not cross the bridge himself. I don't know why he couldn't cross the bridge himself, but he could not. So there's our spooky Headless Horseman. Now, Ichabod tries to court Katrina Van Tassel. So here is Katrina getting courted by Ichabod. So although she's beautiful and charming, it is her family's money that most attracts Ichabod. Abraham Van Brunt, whom everyone calls Brom Bones, is a local farmer and a well-liked town hero who wants to marry Katrina. And Brom Bones is known as being a bit of a prankster. I don't want to say a bully because he seemed to have a good disposition and was well-liked. That's the impression you get in the story. But he definitely enjoys playing on Ichabod's fearful, superstitious nature. So he does all kinds of things to spook him and frighten him. And he laughs at his expense, quite a bit. Probably mostly because he saw that he was a rival for Katrina's affections. So one night, after Katrina rejects Ichabod's proposal at a harvest party, so you can see it all takes place in the fall, thus like the pumpkin imagery and all of that stuff, right? So Ichabod heads home. He's, presumably upset, and he's on a borrowed horse named Gunpowder, and he's pursued by a headless horseman. The horseman throws an object at Ichabod, which knocks him off his horse. And the next day, the townspeople realize that Ichabod is nowhere to be found. He hasn't turned up where and when he should. And so they search for him. When they reach the area of the bridge, all they can find is a smashed pumpkin next to Ichabod's hat. And so you're left right there with a mystery. Ichabod is never seen or heard from again. Fast forward in the story, years later, we're told that Brom and Katrina are married, and it is said that whenever the story of Ichabod's disappearance is discussed, Brom gets a mischievous grin on his face. So what truly happened? Did the ghostly headless horseman take his head? Did Brom dress up as the horseman just to frighten the school teacher? Did Ichabod get so scared that he just left town, never to look back and never to return? It just wasn't worth it. Like, he knew he was rejected, he really had nothing to lose, so he just couldn't take it, right? His nerves could not take it because he was a big chicken. I don't know. When I was a kid, I first learned of the story, I always just thought that it was, the headless horseman got him, very simplistic. When you reread it later, and then you look at all the different ways it can be interpreted, and you see other people's interpretations, you realize it's a lot more open-ended, right? So the ending of the story is left open to the interpretation of the reader. which makes it a perfect theme for a tarot deck, as the cards are also always open to the interpretation of the reader. So let's take a look at the rest of the deck, shall we? Right? I don't know. I'm just going to leave a peek at these. I know you can't see them all anymore, but you stared at them long enough, right? We'll just leave them peeking in there. So in the major arcana, you've already seen Ichabod as the Fool, and Katrina and Ichabod as the lovers, Brom Bones as strength, and the Headless Horseman as death. So we will look at some more. The Magician is shown as a Native American chief whose legend and influence made up some of the local lore in the story, and lended a lot of the supernatural beliefs about it. I don't want to say cursed, I don't think they use that word, but it seemed like the town was a bit under a spell, and there were many theories as to why, and this was one contributing factor, right, was this particular legend of the chief from the area. And it carries the story of the land with it as well, which is interesting. So the High Priestess is shown as a sorceress. This refers to the local stories of women accused of witchcraft. So, it's not just Salem in America where that happened. And there were different versions of people getting ostracized. Not everybody gets, burned at the stake or, find themselves at a trial and things like that. But just the way women were treated in general. There were men as well, and even children, but particularly women, if you look at the numbers. When believed or rumored to be a witch or sorceress. So Sleepy Hollow actually has one particularly famous real-life example of this, and she's known as Huldah the Witch. Her tombstone can be seen in the town's cemetery to this day. So if you want to do some interesting side quests after this video, that's a nice little rabbit hole to fall down. You can look that up. I believe there are videos and articles and all kinds of things about it. So the Empress and the Emperor are the matriarch and patriarch of the Van Tassel estate. So Katrina Van Tassel's wealthy, landed aristocracy, basically, family. And she had no siblings, so there was no one else to inherit. So you can see why she was such an appealing mark, right, for Ichabod. The Hierophant is depicted as a Protestant preacher, which is just really time period appropriate. They did mention church in the story. It's mentioned because we know that Ichabod goes every Sunday and he's really pleased with his own singing voice, so he makes sure to show it off by singing extra loud at church, which isn't real, humble and Jesus-y, is it? He was showing off a little bit. So the Chariot is shown as a farmer plowing the fields. It was largely a farming community. And the Hermit is the woman in white. It was just another local legend, and she was said to haunt a place called Raven's Rock. Just one of those mini spooky stories that get retold about the area in Irving's version. The Wheel of Fortune is a spinning wheel. I love that. Ichabod, one of his favorite things to do was spend his evenings in the company of what he described as the old Dutch wives of the village. And they told spooky stories while they were spinning. Justice, you can see it's just a creepy looking tree with a noose dangling, and it refers to a specific incident from history. So many tales revolved around a local tree where the traitorous Major Andre was said to have been hung for conspiring with the infamous traitor Benedict Arnold. The Hanged Man is a scarecrow. And it really alludes also to some of you can see signs of the sense of humor that Irving clearly had. He definitely had a good time with his descriptions. So he described Ichabod Crane as being so skinny, with clothes so baggy, that people might mistake him for a scarecrow. Temperance is a barmaid, like any who might work in the taverns of the time. But if you look closely, you'll see she's pouring water, not ale. And she's barefoot, so just still an homage, right, to the original card, some of the imagery of it, but we've set her in her place that she could still be part of the town. And the devil was known as Old Scratch in the area. I love all those nicknames that they have. for the devil, especially from this time period. So there's Old Scratch. The Tower, the old Dutch church of Sleepy Hollow. So this was an actual place, and it was said to attract troubled spirits. I'm not sure why. They allude because of the land and the history and the spell under which the land was or found itself. The star is just an enchantress. There's just a lot of reference to magic and different witchy enchantress-like influence. The moon is really interesting. It's a werewolf. I looked it up in the guidebook, and it said that it symbolizes, because we have that werewolf, but if you look closely back here, you have a little tiny representation of a natural wolf. And you have that creepy, crazy, spooky tree on the left, and then you've got just a typical looking healthy tree on the right. And so this duality here that we see seems to be attributed, based on the guidebook, to the concept of, what did they say? They said a wild versus tame, and maybe the unconscious versus conscious. The sun shows Gunpowder, the horse that Ichabod borrowed from his landlord. Ichabod's last ride, right? Judgment, it's pretty tough. It's images of being burned at the stake for witchcraft. We've got a preacher there declaring some harsh judgment, and we have both a man and a woman being burned. The world, so these are just various items from the schoolhouse. So presumably they were Ichabod's things. This looks like the teacher's desk, right? Not the students. And so just like the traditional world card, which alludes to accomplishment and learning, right? Lessons learned, and maybe even achievements, things like that, and getting more into the worldly achievements eventually. Really just kind of a sense of completion. They're using, these images just from this story to kind of convey a similar idea. So we'll go more quickly through the minor arcana, and I don't want to, beat it into the ground, I guess, but I just really enjoy looking at them, so hopefully you're enjoying it as well. When you're looking at the minors, you'll notice that it continues with fully illustrated period-specific imagery, but it strikes a nice balance, really, between everyday kind of imagery from the times and supernatural themes that relate to Sleepy Hollow specifically, or the area, or Irving's work in general. So you really get a balance. It's referring to several kinds of things, but they all relate to this story, and they keep us in that sense of immersion in this place and time, which I really enjoy. We'll just go a little more quickly there. You'll just notice, like, from their attire, you get lots of witchcraft in here. You get all of our knights are headless horsemen, and see, like, it's period specific, like the table, right? Even the goblet, but then it's also extra witchy, right? Love the 3 tankards. I can just hear those drunks singing in the tavern now. Are these the old wives? Yep, we've got the spinning, and he's hanging out, having another cup of tea, getting all the scary stories, and he's going to be terrified on his way home afterwards. He enjoyed the stories, but then he didn't. There really aren't a lot of characters, so I was afraid at first when I heard that this deck was being published that they would just make it a pip deck, which I don't enjoy reading, really. Can read them, but it's never my best readings, I've learned over the years. So I was very pleased that just because there's only a few characters doesn't mean that this couldn't thoughtfully be fully illustrated, and it was, which was pretty delightful, I think. So if this deck has ignited or even reignited your interest in all things Sleepy Hollow, hopefully, I hope that wasn't cut off, I don't think it was, yeah, if it's renewed your interest or sparked your interest, I encourage you to check out the story, from different angles and experiences. Obviously, reading if you haven't done that already. But I also encourage you to maybe watch one of the mini film adaptations of the story. Disney has like an animated one that I saw as a kid. I already mentioned the Tim Burton, Johnny Depp one. I know there are others. You can also pick up your own copy of this fabulous deck, or if you really want to have a cool, memorable adventure and it's within the realm of possibility, plan a visit to the birthplace of it all, right? Sleepy Hollow itself. I'll share some links in the description for this video. And if you enjoy deck discussions like this one, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel just to let YouTube and me know that you found some value in it. And always, 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 thank you so much for watching. Bye.